you suppose might be better qualified to raise your children? You or the state? I ask this only because 4 British children's commissioners, whatever the hell they might be, addressed the United Nations this week, arguing that smacking should be made illegal in England and Wales. There are already, and quite rightly, laws in place to guard against undue chastisement. But speaking as someone who was never smacked and has never smacked, and with 2 sons in their 20s, I'm unlikely to ever give it a go, I say parents must be allowed to parent, observing all current laws. Anything else smacks of the nanny state.
Well, I mean, it's such an emotive subject, isn't it? Because ultimately it's define smack. What is a smack?
Yeah.
Is it once during a childhood? Is it something that people do and then because they get more and more frustrated, they then continue to smack and it gets harder and harder and then becomes much more abusive and breaks the very laws that you say we need to uphold? I think it's difficult because you can't.
It's not difficult.
You can't judge somebody's behaviour on a one-off. So if I saw somebody in a supermarket smack a child, I might have an opinion on whether I think that's right or wrong, given the ferocity of the hit. But I suppose as a parent myself, I always wanted to think what the benefit of smacking my child was, and therefore would it stop them doing something in the future? And I came to the conclusion that it didn't. So I never smacked my children.
Were you smacked?
I was, yeah, I didn't want to live in fear of my parents, and thankfully that didn't happen to me. But I know a lot of young people do. If they get smacked regularly, they get chased around the house to get smacked.
Yeah.
Then they start to live in fear.
I think.
What's the opposite problem?
Well, I mean, I was smacked, and I was actually, probably hit a bit harder than that. But as we say,
by your parent,
it really never did me any harm. But I wish that my children were more frightened of me. I mean, I had the opposite problem. It didn't seem to me that they
Have you smacked your kids?
I have, and I was thinking about this.
What would earn them a smack?
I have, and the occasions I did it, when I've thought back at them, it's times when I wasn't in control. And so I'm not proud of the fact that I did, but I don't think I should be prosecuted for the fact that I did.
But you wouldn't want the state controlling that, would you?
No, but I think there are laws. I don't think you are allowed to hit your child hard enough to leave a mark.
That's right.
And I think there is a difference between a light slap. Let's say if a children was running into the road, you drag them back and you say, never do that again. And you might reinforce your point with a slap like that. But, God, I've never walloped my kids. I have to say that I did once kick my child, but it was outside the school gates. Wow. And I was reported by another parent to the head. I cannot tell you how infuriating it was. I had 2 kids in the car and one child I had to get out of a Wendy house in a school playground. So I started carrying one toddler and had another one under my arms, and I got to the car and neither would get in the car, and I was on a double yellow line and I was sort of like putting them into the car like that, and then one of them refused,
the door open?
And I had to sort of literally do this to get him in, right? Then, of course, I had to go and see the headmaster, and I was absolutely mortified. But, you know, I said, I accept it. I lost my temper. I lost control. I'm really sorry. It's not that sort of thing I do. It's that it was... Anyway, there we are. These things happen, is what I'm saying.
They do, and for me personally, this is a real tough one. And I wrestle with myself on this because I don't have children, but when I do have children, I would want to discipline my children the way that I saw fit, and if it involved slapping them if they've run out into the road, then so be it. I would want to do that and not be prosecuted. But where I was brought up, I don't know what the word is for it, but we were very heavily physically abused by my father. So my whole childhood, I was on the social services at-risk register. Yeah, social services were heavily involved in my upbringing. We was in domestic violence refuges and also children's homes. And I struggle a little bit. So even when I think of the law as it is now, which is kind of, if you leave a mark, you'll get prosecuted. Well, I was hit with plates, pans wrapped in, tablecloths and hit with those, and that never left a mark. So just because there's not a mark, that's not OK. And I struggle because I think when we talk about slapping and smacking, how are you going to police this? How are you going to... Because when somebody smacks or slaps, it's because they've lost their temper. They don't sit there and rationally go, do I want to discipline my child with a smack? It's not. They've got a rage,
and if you count to 10,
and they'll smack.
If you count to 10, you would never smack a child.
That's true.
If you actually got to 10.
Yeah, I agree.
Even the instance of running across the road, just so the child knows.
Yeah,
I don't mean wallop like what you endured. That's horrific. I'm very sorry to hear that. But just a slap on the back.
And that's a natural reaction. That's why it's so impossible, so difficult to legislate against, because that is a natural reaction as a parent, because you're scared as the child in that situation.
But you want to make sure the kiddie never does it again.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, at that age, if they're 2 or 3, you smacking them isn't going to make a difference. If 2 weeks later, they see something that they're going to run after again, they're still going to do it because they live in the moment. Yeah. But any type of punishment for children has to be done straight away. And I think nowadays we've got so many... You know, if you take something away from a child, that is just as upsetting than smacking them.
Remember my central point. True. It is your job to be a dad.
Absolutely.
It's not the state's job to tell you how to be a dad, to tell you how to be a mum, to tell you girls when...
Smacking is banned in several countries.
Yeah, but...
Completely illegal.
Absolutely.
So what is the penalty imposed on the parents?
One of the countries is Spain, and I go to Spain a lot, and they're smacking their kids just as much as anyone else. So clearly, even if it is illegal...
It's honoured in the breach, or whatever the expression is.
You've got to think where this is coming from. So, you say, what on earth are children's commissioners? Well, that's some of the people that are meant to be caring for children in this country whose parents aren't doing a good enough job necessarily of keeping them safe. I'm just saying, there are children in this country where their safe place isn't their home. Of course.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So there is a situation where everyone around this table, I don't yet have children, but is in a position, hopefully, where they wouldn't need to be looked at by authorities because they feel they can keep control of what's going on in their homes, whether that's because they're not dependent on some sort of substance or they're not in poverty or they're not stressed. Like you're saying, I don't think you would necessarily hit a child if you were really in control. And yet, in another way, I think it's interesting that... So my husband's one of 3 boys, right? And a mum at home with 3 boys, my mother-in-law, they knew not to mess, right? And actually, a lot of people used to do the whole wait till your father gets home, because that was the person that could really give you a wallop, a bit harder, and it was a different person coming in. As that maybe dies out, as everything's becoming a bit more equal, that'd be interesting how that changes. But my husband remembers his mum. Not only could she run fast, if she caught you on the stairs, ankle, pulled down the stairs, and you would be given a bit of a tap. Right. If you had spoken to her out of line or you'd done something where he'd crossed... They were largely good boys, but it was necessary for a bit of fear to have discipline.
But you don't want the police getting involved.
But how would we police it? And that's the thing that when I keep thinking about. So let's just argue then that this gets granted, it gets made illegal to smack your child. How do you police that? That's the bit I can't get my head round.
Well, you'd have kids ringing the cops.
Yeah,
the
thing is, you can't police it any differently. The only other thing that would come into play is that you would be reported. Wouldn't you? In terms of somebody else would report you because you've been seen slapping your child, and again that then doesn't, then we become the police, and
what we haven't
that
talked
doesn't work.
about is, we wrestle. If you see a father, he wrestles with his toddler. If you see a bear with her cubs, she's often cuffing them when they bring them into line, and to do that. It's a sort of almost natural. If you watch grizzlies in the wild, and you model your parenting style on them, Nick, they're always... I'm not saying I do it, but what I'm saying is we are animals. It's slightly an animal instinct as well. Just as it is to... You probably, wrestle with your kids, or you did, and, they quite enjoyed it. I'm not saying they like being smacked, but... Why do we have the impulse? It's almost a physical impulse, and you want to rein yourself in, but sometimes you can't.
And it's love, isn't it?
And it's partly love. It's because, it's not like domestic battery.
No.
With parents and children, it's different. You love them, you're trying to protect them. It's part of the armoury of things you have. It's not the best thing.
I agree, and I agree with you, Nick, that I don't think making smacking illegal is going to change anything, because people that abuse children do it discreetly. So it's not going to stop them. No. And I just think if it is illegal, it's going to be so difficult to police that it's going to be pointless. So I think parents should discipline how they want, but I think child abuse is definitely wrong, but I don't see the occasional smack as being that.
I still feel we've got to make sure we educate people away from that behaviour as much as we can, so that we don't end up with a chain that continues.
Yeah, and
as
my
children
final
get
point:
older.
if you went into a bar and someone really infuriated you, an adult, and your reaction was to smack them, you're going to get done. So it does feel a little bit odd, to contradict myself, that you can do that to a child.
I must impose the smack-a-firm government on this debate now.